In 1998, a fisherman named Jean-Claude Bianco was working in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Marseille, France. As a storm approached, his crew quickly hauled in a trawling net and found an engraved bracelet entangled in it. Upon examining the bracelet, Bianco was startled to see a famous name he immediately recognized, so he showed the item to government authorities. They decided that the bracelet probably was a fake. That is, until a scuba diver later told people about an airplane wreck lying at the sea bottom near Bianco's fishing area. The airplane was a Lockheed P-38 Lightning from World War II, and the name on the bracelet was none other than that of the French pilot and author Antoine de Saint-Exupery, known around the world for his children's story entitled, in English, The Little Prince. On June 29, 1900, Antoine Marie Jean-Baptiste Roger de Saint-Exupery was born in Lyon, France, into a family with long-established roots in the French aristocracy. One ancestor had fought with the American revolutionaries at the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. Antoine's father, the Viscount Jean de Saint-Exupery, was an insurance executive who suffered a fatal stroke in 1904. 5 years after Jean died, Saint-Exupéry's mother, Marie, moved with her children to the castle of Saint-Maurice-de-Romain in Le Mans, owned by her mother. Along with his 3 sisters and 1 brother, Saint-Exupéry spent his childhood years surrounded by many relatives and the friends of his mother. His early education included the study of literature, drama, and related arts. In 1912, he took his first airplane ride at a small airfield near his grandmother's home. Soon enough, life became much more complicated for the teenaged boy. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was killed by a Serb assassin. The nations of Europe started aligning themselves in opposing military camps as Austria-Hungary and Serbia waged war against each other. World War I began in earnest on August 1st, when Germany declared war on Russia. In spite of the war, Antoine and his brother François started attending a Jesuit secondary school near Lyon. As the war grew worse, however, the 2 brothers retreated to a school in Switzerland, where Antoine started writing poetry. In 1917, François died of rheumatic fever. In the same year, however, Saint-Exupéry passed his baccalaureate and then sought entrance into the French Naval Academy, but failed the oral part of the entrance test. He then entered the School of Fine Arts in Paris and studied architecture for over a year. In 1921, he started military service in the 2nd Regiment of the French Light Cavalry. He then went to Strasbourg in eastern France for training as a pilot. On July 9th, piloting a Sopwith biplane, he made his first solo flight. In the next year, he earned his pilot's license and was offered a transfer to the Air Service. And a year after that, the young aviator became engaged to Louise de Villemarin, who eventually became a well-known author in her own right. Saint-Exupéry wanted to continue flying, but his fiancée's family objected to his interest in what was, in the 1920s, still a very dangerous activity. Following the family's wishes, he instead settled in Paris, took an office job, and began to write in earnest. Over the next few months, he ran through a series of dissatisfying jobs, and his engagement to Louise ended. In 1926, the editor Adrienne Monnier printed Saint-Exupéry's first published tale, The Aviator, in her literary magazine. That same year, he returned to flying, this time carrying mail for a private airline company. For 3 years, he flew the mail over North Africa, escaping deadly airplane accidents several times. He also became director of a remote airfield in the Sahara Desert. The pilot and author's first novel, Southern Mail, appeared in France in 1929, and in the United States 4 years later. In late 1929, also, Saint-Exupery moved to South America and became director of an airmail service in Argentina. Along with him, one of the company's first pilots was the Frenchman Henri Guillemette. Two other Frenchmen, Jean Mermoz and Marcel Rennes, also helped to fly the mail. During his time with the company, Saint-Exupery flew both a Lotco Air 25 aircraft and a more advanced version, the Lotco Air 28. Saint-Exupery's South American experiences became the basis for his second novel, Night Flight, which appeared in France in 1931. For this novel he received the Femina Prize, one of France's leading literary awards. The book later appeared in America and became such a bestseller that Hollywood made a film version of the novel, starring Lionel Barrymore and Clark Gable. In March of 1931, Saint-Exupery married an Argentinian beauty named Consuelo Carrillo, the widow of Enrique Gomez Carrillo, a Guatemalan diplomat and journalist. She counted among her friends the Nobel Prize winner Maurice Maeterlinck and the Italian novelist, poet, and dramatist Gabriele D'Annunzio. Over the years the marriage was unsettled. Husband and wife frequently lived apart, as Saint-Exupery often was absent on long flights. On July 12, 1934, for example, he started from Marseille for Saigon and returned to the former city 10 days later, July 22nd. In late April of 1935, he went to Moscow to cover the Soviet May Day celebrations for the prominent French newspaper Paris Soir. In December of that same year, he had another aviation accident, this time in Libya. He and his mechanic walked in the desert for 3 days before being found by a Bedouin caravan. In 1937, Saint-Exupery bought a Caudron Simoun, a brand of airplane he had used while working for Air France in its early years of operation. He had bad luck with this airplane, too. In 1938, he crashed in Guatemala, this time severely injuring himself. While recovering from his injuries, he was encouraged by the French author and his friend, André Gide, to write a book about the piloting profession. In 1939, Saint-Exupery published Land of Men, a record of his flying adventures, which won a major literary award from the French Academy. That same year, the novel appeared in the United States as Wind, Sand, and Stars, and won the National Book Award. Movie director Jean Renoir talked with Saint-Exupery about doing a film version of the novel, but no one came forward to finance the film. In May of 1940, during World War II, France fell to German forces. Saint-Exupery joined the Free French Army and made several daring flights, for which he received a major French commendation. He eventually escaped from Europe and moved into a new apartment building in New York City overlooking Central Park. For a few months he also lived on Long Island's North Shore, where he worked on the small book that would bring him his greatest fame as a writer. During Saint-Exupery's absence from France, the Vichy regime appointed him to its new National Council, but he protested strongly against this supposed honor. He opposed the German occupation, but offered only weak support for the Free French leader Charles de Gaulle, and defended himself against criticism of this view by publishing a letter to his countrymen in the New York Times. In 1942, Saint-Exupery published another book, War Pilot, which told of hopeless flights over German forces when France already was near defeat. That same year, the book was published in America as Flight to Arras. In 1943 he published his best-known work, The Little Prince, in both French and in English. The book did not appear in France until 1945, after the war had ended. The story is a fable for both children and adults. Through the years it has been translated into over 100 languages, and has been called the best-selling book in the world, after the Bible and Karl Marx's Das Kapital. According to the Books and Writers website, quote, its narrator is a pilot who has crash-landed in a desert. He meets a boy who turns out to be a prince from another planet. The prince tells about his adventures on Earth and about his precious rose from his planet. He is disappointed when he discovers that roses are common on Earth. A desert fox convinces him that the prince should love his own rare rose, and, finding meaning to his life, the prince returns home. Unquote. Unfortunately, Saint-Exupéry's actual life did not turn out as happily as that of his fictional boy. After finishing the book, he returned to Europe and joined his old flight squadron. On July 31st, 1944, Saint X, as his squadron mates called him, took off from an Allied airstrip in Corsica and headed for southern France. His plane, a Lockheed P-38 reconnaissance aircraft, never returned to base. Various parties speculated that he had been shot down over the Mediterranean, had an in-flight accident, or even committed suicide. The suicide theory grew out of the perception that he had felt isolated in his squadron and seemed pessimistic about the future. On a previous mission, however, he had simply had trouble with his oxygen mask and almost passed out. At his death, Saint-Exupéry left behind an unfinished book called La Citadelle. It also appeared in English as The Wisdom of the Sands. He also left behind some notebooks, also published after his death. His widow, Consuelo, died in 1979. She is buried in Père-Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. But what in particular caused the pilot-author's death? A German fighter pilot from World War II, Horst Rippert, believes he shot down Saint-Exupéry. In modern-day interviews, he has said that before the war he had read and admired Saint-Exupéry's writings. He also has claimed that he never would have attacked the P-38 if he had known that the author he admired was flying the enemy plane. Interviews with surviving pilots and a lack of German wartime documents, however, raised doubts about Rippert's claim regarding the dogfight. As well, in the year 2000, a diver named Luc van Rel precisely located the remains of Saint-Exupéry's plane. 3 years later, a salvage team brought to the surface major pieces of the craft. Accident examiners confirmed the plane's identity by its serial number. But the examiners found no bullet holes or other combat damage in the remnants. For most people, therefore, the specific cause of Saint-Exupéry's death remains a mystery to this day.